Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus took Peter, John, and James and went up the mountain to pray. While he was praying, his face changed in appearance, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, two men were conversing with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his exodus that he was going to accomplish in Jerusalem. Peter and his companions had been overcome by sleep, but becoming fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As they were about to part from him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." But he did not know what he was saying. While he was still speaking, a cloud came and cast a shadow over them, and they became frightened. And when they entered the cloud, then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my chosen son. Listen to him." After the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. They fell silent and did not at that time tell anyone what they had seen. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Right now in your life, how is God asking you to trust him? Right now in your life, how is God asking you to trust him? We all know that trusting in God is our daily task. It's essential to being a follower of Christ, to being a Christian. And yet when it comes to trusting in God, we're all inclined to doubt and to question and to hesitate. We always want proof that God is trustworthy. But here's the thing. We only find out that God is trustworthy after we've made a decision to trust him, and not before. We find out that God is worthy of our trust after we've decided to trust him, and not before. We see this in our readings today very clearly. First reading, Abram is asked to trust God in big ways. He's already been asked to leave everything and follow God in an unknown place. And then in today's reading, he's asked to make some pretty substantial sacrifices to God. What we just heard, a heifer, a she-goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a pigeon. That's a lot. It's probably half his barn. And I'm sure he would have been tempted to question that, to doubt, and maybe to bargain with God. Well, I won't give you all 5 of these things, but maybe a sick goat or something like that. But he doesn't. He sacrifices all of it to God. And then what do we find? God proves he's trustworthy. He gives Abram this supernatural experience, puts him in a trance. Then he has this torch of fire come down and split the sacrifices in half, symbolizing that he has made a covenant with Abram, and he's going to be faithful to that covenant. God proves himself trustworthy. But what about the gospel today? The gospel that we have is the scene of the Transfiguration. As a side note, this church was almost called the parish of the Transfiguration because of the beautiful stained glass window up there to the west. But it wasn't. His name's St. Eugene. After Eugenio Pacelli, actually, Pius XII. But that's all tangential. Transfiguration. 8 days before the Transfiguration in the Gospel, we hear that Jesus had some pretty tough news to give his disciples. He had just explained to them that the Son of Man was going to go to Jerusalem, and there he was going to be denied, rejected, handed over, and killed. But not only that, there's also some pretty terrible implications for his followers. They were going to have to deny themselves and daily take up their crosses. Now, you don't think his disciples were questioning following him on this journey? I'm sure they were full of doubts. And then 8 days after that tough scene, Jesus wants to take Peter, James, and John up Mount Tabor. Now, Mount Tabor is a pretty steep mountain. I've actually walked up it on the road, and it took me 2 hours. But I was wondering what it was like for Peter, James, and John following Jesus up there. So I then tried to actually go through the terrain rather than take the road. Well, it was rocky, it was really steep, and there were thorny bushes everywhere. I got about 10 yards, and then I called it quits and got back on the road. Peter, James, and John were probably doubting all this, wondering, what are we doing? But they make a decision to continue following Jesus. And then what happens? God proves himself trustworthy after that decision. He's transfigured. They get a hint of his glory. His face begins to shine. The voice comes from heaven and speaks that this is his beloved Son. His clothes are dazzling white. Moses and Elijah appear. God proves himself trustworthy. So where in your life is God calling you to trust him right now? You know, it's hard to get this logic that we need to make a decision to trust God before we find out he's trustworthy. It's difficult because it's very counterintuitive. I mean, most of the time in life, you know, we always weigh the pros and cons before we make a decision. You know, we're taught to gather all the evidence and collect all the facts and then make a really smart, rational, prudential decision. And that's fine on a natural level, but when it comes to the things of God, when it comes to the life of the Spirit, we can't prove things in the same way before we make the decision. We're called to have faith and to trust. I remember when I first began to discern this vocation to be a priest, and I was wondering, Lord, are you really calling me to do this? It seems quite strange. Never expected this was going to happen. And I questioned it in all sorts of ways. For a few years, I was just tiptoeing around the idea, looking at it from different perspectives, trying to figure out before I entered the seminary if it was a guaranteed, surefire thing. You know what? I never found out. Until I made a decision to give it a try. And then after that, through a whole plethora of experiences, God proved that he was trustworthy. So where in your life right now is God calling you to trust him? Especially, this is an important question for us during Lent. Lent can be a challenging time. I get it. We all challenge ourselves to follow Jesus a little more closely. Where is God calling you to trust him this Lent? Maybe you've been considering adding some more prayer to your daily routine. Maybe 15 minutes. You look at 15 minutes of extra prayer and you think, oh, I don't know, Lord. That's asking quite a bit. How am I ever going to get everything done and give you this extra 15 minutes? Well, how do you know that you won't get everything done? Unless you give it a try. Make a decision to give God that extra time, and I guarantee you, he'll prove himself trustworthy. Maybe it's making an extra sacrifice. Maybe you've deliberated foregoing some television watching every night. Maybe you know you watch too much and you're thinking you should just cut it out of your life. But then you question it and think, I don't know. I mean, is it really necessary for me to do that? Isn't there something else I can sacrifice? Well, how do you know that it's going to be too difficult? Unless you give it a try. Make a decision to give that to God. And I bet he'll prove himself trustworthy. Maybe it's a matter of giving more. Maybe you've really been toying with the idea of giving an extra 0.5% or an extra 1%. But you look at that figure and you think, I don't know, that's a little bigger than I would like it to be. And then you question, you doubt, you don't think it's possible, you're not going to have enough to make ends meet. Well, how do you know? Unless you try. I bet you God will prove himself trustworthy. Maybe it's making a good confession this Lent. Maybe it's been a little while, you're thinking this is the year for mercy, this is the season of Lent, this beautiful time of receiving God's mercy, the sacrament of reconciliation. You've been thinking about that, but then there's a lot of excuses that come up. I'm not that bad of a person, I try my best, I don't see anything huge on my soul that needs to be confessed. How do you really know? Unless you make a good examination of conscience and give it a try, God will prove himself trustworthy and give you an abundance of grace in that sacrament. So the upshot of everything today is that if we want to know God is trustworthy, we first must make a decision. Give him a try. Abram did this in the first reading. He didn't know what the Lord was asking of him entirely, and yet he continued to follow after him. Peter, James, and John, they certainly were tempted to doubt, but they made a decision to stick with him. During this Lent, there's certainly going to be a lot of challenging times. It's that time of year, after all. It's kind of like training camp. It can be tough. But we know that if we make this decision to give God everything we have, to entrust our lives to him, in the end, he will most certainly prove himself worthy of all our trust.